Well, welcome everyone to the Sack Story Swap genre storytelling series. There we go. I'm now featured so I can see myself nice and big. I'll say that again. Welcome everyone to the Sack Story Swap genre storytelling series with tonight's theme, Tall Tales. This is, for those of you who are maybe new to this show, this is part of a series that we do on the third Wednesday of every month. Each month features a different type or genre of story. Tonight's genre, Tall Tales. Now, for those of you who aren't quite clear or quite sure what a tall tale is, and you don't want to Google it or something, just think of a tall tale as generally a story that has something unbelievable in it. Sometimes that's done with hyperbole or exaggeration. They can be true stories, they can be untrue stories, but usually they have some kind of exaggeration. So we're going to hear all manner of tall tales tonight, told by 7 storytellers who are representing different guilds, different storytelling groups all over the great state of California, part of the Storytelling Association of California. And it's a really terrific lineup of storytellers tonight. My name is Corey Rosen. I'm from San Francisco. And I'll tell a very, very brief tall tale just to kind of warm you up in very brief, which is that I am kind of a notorious liar, especially when it comes to telling things to my children, because my children will believe anything, especially when they were very young. And when my son Henry was 2, his favorite thing in the world was Star Wars action figures. But the thing is, he didn't own any Star Wars action figures. All he had was 2 things. He had a book that I had that was a collection of images of Star Wars action figures and my Star Wars figures, which he was not allowed to play with. They were locked in a lucite cabinet because that's what kind of a jerk dad I am. So one of the Star Wars figures in there that for some reason he got very interested in was a Bespin security guard, which for those of you who aren't fans or familiar with the Star Wars canon, is a very minor character. You shouldn't know, even people who know Star Wars probably don't know that Bespin security guards are these kind of uniformed officers that are kind of in the background of the second of Empire Strikes Back on Cloud City. That's kind of all you need to know. So it's Christmas time, and I decided to order my son his own batch of Star Wars figures. That's going to be his present. It's going to be, he's 2 years old, a bunch of Star Wars figures. And so I order them in the most, frugal way possible. I order them on eBay in bulk, right? I ordered a lot, like a batch, a big plastic bag filled with somebody else's kids or their Star Wars figures. And when they arrive, one of them is damaged because you're buying used stuff on eBay. And it was a Bespin security guard. And I don't know why they included it in this batch, but it arrived with no head. It was a headless toy, but yet it was unmistakably this character that was in my book of Star Wars action figures. And so I'm reading the book with my son one night, and he stops on the Bespin security guard, and I have to make a decision as a dad. Do I take this out of the bunch of toys and throw this away? Or do I make up my own tall tale, which I kind of felt like was the more interesting way to go? So I told him in passing, I said, Henry, sometimes Bespin security guards don't have heads. Now, he's never seen a Star Wars movie. He doesn't know the world, the story. He didn't know the concept, but I see his little brain just like, Bespin security guards don't have head. Like, what does that even mean? I don't know. And actually, to be honest, I kind of forgot about it because a few, weeks later, it's Christmas morning. And instead of like making him open every individual thing, I decided to set all the figures up kind of so that when he arrives, when he comes, upstairs, he sees like there's all the toys. So all of the toys are there, and there's all these, characters all lined up, about 20, 25 action figures lined up. And my son looks at them and he's, taking in, these things exist. They're not just in his book. They are real things. And then his eyes lock on what. And he goes, Dad, I got a investment security card and it doesn't have a head. Realized in that moment, a parenting moment, is that we have the opportunity to make stories wherever we go. And that even the characters that might exist in somebody else's universe can become characters that we want in our own universe. And sometimes a broken toy to one person is a dream to another, because sometimes Bespin security guards don't have heads. Thank you. Okay, great. We are going to start the show in earnest, and each of the stories tonight is going to be told by, there's 7 storytellers. Each one is going to be about 10 minutes or less. And as a prompt for each of the storytellers tonight, I asked them something kind of unusual. I asked them to go into either their phone or their email and to find a recent text message that they either sent or received, or maybe an email that they had, and then rewrite it as a tall tale. So let's bring up our first storyteller, David Tarvin from the Sacramento Storyteller Guild. Hello, David. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So for your tall tale introduction, I asked you to read a real text. And do you remember what the text said?
Yeah, it was something like, good news, you'll be receiving your item soon.
Yes. And do you want to do it, or do you want me to tell your tall tale version of good news? Your package is arriving early. So your tall tale version of good news, your package is arriving early is, hey, I'm snowshoeing through the Sierras with your DVDs. Perfect. That was perfect. All right. With that said, I'm going to turn over the stage to you. So please give it up for your first storyteller, David Tarvin.
Well, thank you, everybody, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and to tell a story. Luckily, Corey told us the story with a child in it. My story, too, has a child in it somewhere. And anyways, but my story doesn't begin with one. It starts with, I'm an old guy, and I'm always taking up new hobbies. And I took up a new hobby last year, plein air painting. Now, plein air is French. It just means outside. So plein air painters do, guess what? They paint outside. But you got to have specialized equipment. You got to have this. You got to have that. And I got all that stuff, and I was excited. I had a goal. And my goal was this: drive, park, and paint. That was the goal. It sounds so easy to me. So I loaded up my truck when I had all the equipment. I tested it in the living room first, but then I loaded it and I started driving, looking for the perfect place to paint. And it turns out that that's a lot harder to do than it sounds. Easier said than done. I mean, I drove for miles looking for some scenic thing out in the country where I could pull over and park. But guess what? Country roads don't have places where you could just pull over. They're narrow little roads. And so every time I found a place where you could pull off, it wasn't anything worthwhile painting. So I searched and I searched. So one day I was just on the outskirts of town. I live in Auburn, California, one of the original gold towns. And I found this place I'd never heard of. It was an olive orchard, and it was right on the outskirts of the original town. It'd been huge, covered acres and acres. The trees there were like 150 years old. Some gold miner planted them after the gold panning didn't work for him. And so I walked into this old olive orchard and looked around, and then I went back and I got my equipment out, and on the side of the road there was a nice little turnout there, and I started to paint, and I painted and I painted and I painted for a couple of hours. Well, all of a sudden I noticed out of my periphery that somebody was watching me. One of the neighbors ladies, she was parked crossways in her driveway. She was just staring at me, and I realized she'd been there for a long time. And I turned to face her, and then out the other side, all of a sudden I caught these lights, and I turned around just in time to hear whoop, 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 whoop. So I'm standing there in front of my easel with a half painted canvas, paintbrush in my hand, and this police officer walks up to me and he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" I looked at him and I didn't say anything, but I thought, dude, I'm standing here with a paintbrush in front of an easel with a painting. What do you mean? What am I doing? But I was nice and polite. So I just explained to him, I got a new hobby. I'm painting that beautiful tree, 150-year-old tree. And we had our little chat, and he left. Well, a couple of weeks went by, and I'm out driving and driving and driving, looking for that perfect painting. And I wanted a big sweeping vista to paint. And I drove out past Lincoln, California, that faces the Sutter Buttes. And it's beautiful, but I couldn't find a place to park. And so I kept driving and driving and driving out in the country. And pretty soon I was on this road that it didn't really describe anything other than it said no outlet, which means, dead end somewhere. So I drove down it, and pretty soon I get to the end, about 5 miles down the road. Turns out it was the back entrance to Beale Air Force Base. Well, I just turned around, I started driving back, and I went about 2 miles, and there across from me, as I made this turn, were a bunch of mailboxes and a huge turnout. So I whipped a Huey and I parked there, and it was perfect. I was 10 feet back from the road. I had a beautiful view of the Sierra Buttes. I set up my equipment, and I painted. And after a couple hours, I took a little break, and I was sitting in my little Honda Element, and I'm eating my lunch. And all of a sudden I noticed there was this car parked up on a hill about a mile away. And I realized that the car's been there for a while. What is he doing out in the middle of nowhere? But I mean, it was a mile away. I couldn't exactly make it out. So I finished my lunch. I went back to painting, and I finished my painting, and I started cleaning up. And pretty soon, all this time, cars are going back and forth, back and forth. Well, all of a sudden, out of my periphery, I see some lights. I turn and I hear that sound. Whoop, 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 whoop. I'm like, oh my God. So there I am, standing in front of my easel with the paintbrush, painting on the easel. And out of this squad car steps this military policeman. And he walks up to me and he goes, "Excuse me, sir, but what is it exactly that you are doing?" I'm thinking to myself, I got a paintbrush, brother. I'm standing in front of an easel with a painting on it. But I was nice and polite. I said, I'm an old man. I got a new hobby. I'm painting this beautiful scene. Look at those buttes. This is a beautiful scene, We had a little chat, and he said, okay. And he left. But then 10 minutes later, he came back. I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, my superior said, we got to get the license plate on your car. I'm like, okay, whatever you need. He leaves. Well, my adventures just kind of kept going, and I'm painting this and painting that. And then one day I get a phone call from my daughter. Now, my daughter is married to a man from India. He's East Indian. And they have 2 children together. And she says, I'm having a problem with the oldest boy. Can he come and visit you? I said, sure, send him out, teach him how to paint. Send that boy down. Shows up. Oh man, dude's a typical teenager. And he had this funny little thing, he was all about his, since he's like a mixed ethnicity. He was all about, you know, his ethnic background, and he wanted to be called by his middle name, which is Shabam, which is his other grandfather's name. And so that's what I had to call him. Took a while to get used to that. And he did not like going painting with me. Now, he was with me for 2 weeks. And so then at the end of his Thanksgiving break, I went to the airport, and we were going to fly back to my daughter's house, right? And I'm standing in line, you know, the security check and everything. I get up to the front of the line, and all of a sudden I get this strange look. The guy's got the wand doing this. And they said, "Excuse me, sir, you got to step over here." Like, what? They got my stuff, and I took all my paint and stuff. I couldn't believe it. They're going through all my stuff. They're squeezing paint out of the tubes. Do you have any idea what that paint cost? Well, so I'm watching them, and they're searching me. Well, Shabam, he didn't like that. He's a testy teenage boy, and he's a pretty big dude for his age. Pretty tough, athletic dude. He starts getting mouthy. I said, "Look, don't be doing that. Just settle down. Whatever they're doing, they're doing." And then this TSA officer says, "Well, you know, you're on a list." Turns out I was on a list from that whole Beale incident. Well, I'm just standing there, but Shwan, he said, I'm not doing this. I'm out of here. Well, he goes to leave in a huff, and I started yelling after him, "Shabam, Shabam, Shabam," which if you say it loud enough, it doesn't quite, to some ears, it sounds like shoe bomb, shoe bomb, shoe bomb. Well, this TSA guy came out of nowhere, and he actually went to grab Shabam. I stepped to him, and I just spun like that, like a little top. And when that TSA officer hit me, he just bounced off. Well, Shabam turned, and he looked, and his eyes were as big as saucers. And he had this big smile on his face. And that was the last thing I saw as I hit the ground with about 6 of those other TSA officers on top of me. Well, those boys drug me off. They drug him off. And he was in this little room talking to some TSA officers. There was this glass window there. And I'm in another room with a bunch of desks and personnel in there. And I'm just waiting. I'm not very happy at this point. I'm kind of disillusioned, to say the least. And then they bring in this old man. Big, portly guy. I mean, big dude. Long white hair, long white beard, much fuller, bigger, longer than mine. And he sits down next to me. So I took that opportunity to do one of my favorite little things. I started whining. Well, after listening for a while, the guy just turns to me and said his name was Nick. He says, "You know," he said, "Dave, I fly for a living. I fly everywhere. I go everywhere." But he says, nowadays, he said, in the past, I could do whatever I wanted, but nowadays, I got to come to airports like this, and I got to get security clearance. He said, "You know, that's just the way that it is." And he said, "You know, old guys, we have to adapt." And he said, "You know, you got to focus on kind of what you're getting." He said, "You got to give, and then you'll receive." And so I thought about that. I sat there and I thought, you know, maybe he's right. And they called him, and old Nick, well, he got up and he started walking away, and he is such a funny dude. Big portly guy, and I could have swore I heard these little bells ringing, and as he walked away, he was humming, and I could have swore it was some old Christmas song. It looks like it's going to be Christmas or something like that. So anyways, a couple hours went by. We all got released, and Shabam and I, well, we had to drive to my daughter's house, but it was a nice long drive, and we really bonded over that drive. Well, I drove back and I did a lot of painting coming back. And then at Christmas, I went out to see them. And when I got off of the plane, there was Shaban. He ran up and threw his arms around me, said, Grandpa, 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 I'm so glad to see you here. And he said, I got something for you. And he held out this paintbrush. He said, it's French from Paris. I got it for your plein air painting. Well, that whole Christmas thing, he and I went out painting every day. And at the end of my trip, I realized, I thought back to that Thanksgiving thing with that old man Nick, and I thought, he was right, In the end, sometimes we do receive something that's really, really good.
David Tarvin, everybody. That was so good. Beautiful. Beautifully told. Funny, crazy, exciting, and poetic in so many ways.
True.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and true, and all true.
All true.
6 security guards that jumped on you. I don't know. I'm not going to ask where the exaggeration is, if there is any, but really well told, and thank you for telling it.
My pleasure.
All right. Let's move along. It's actually funny. My speaking of painting, my daughter loves to paint, and but right now in school, she's a freshman in high school. She's taking pretty much all like STEM classes, and she's kind of upset about that. But the other night, I walk into her room, and it's like 11:45 at night. She's happily working away at her homework, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she was doing her science homework. And she's just like happily like in this. And I look closely at what she's doing. She was making a science comic. She was drawing like how scientific, chemical bonds work between soap and grease. Anyway, it was like she was like, how come all my homework can't be drawing, right? So if you're a teacher out there, keep that in mind. Anyway, let's move on to our next storyteller. Camille Miller from the Contra Costa Tail Spinners. How are you, Camille?
Oh, I'm sweaty. How are you?
I'm also hot and sweaty. Yeah, it's a little hot in here. Actually, it's not. It's temperate, let's say. But I asked you, to read a text. Your text, if you don't remember, was, where is he playing? I liked that. Where is he playing? Because I could relate to anything. And then your tall tale was, the retired violin sobbed when asked where he's playing next. It was very poetic, very beautiful. I love that. Anyway, are you ready to tell us your story?
I better be.
All right, we'll take it away. Please put your hands together for your next storyteller, Camille Miller.
5 years at the same job. And for 3 of those 5 years, Joe has been inviting me to his house. Now, Joe is okay as far as men go. Some of his grayish brown hair has escaped the top of his head, and his stomach has more love than I can handle. But really, it's not about his physical appearance. There's just no chemistry there. When I fall in love, it fits like a hand to a glove, a foot to a shoe, dental floss to the food in my teeth. Besides, he always has this kind of strange smell. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's something like a dog, perhaps. Well, last Friday, Joe said he was going to have a shindig at his house. I'd love it if you come. It'll be fun. Now, this guy has been riding me like a tick on a dog. So I thought, maybe if I go just this one time, it'll get him off my back. Sure, Joe. Give me all your information and I'll be there. Well, Joe scurried away and quickly returned with a sticky note with his address and, of course, a smiley face. So it's Friday, the end of the work week, and Joe comes over. I'll see you tomorrow? Yeah, Joe. I'll see you tomorrow. Saturday afternoon, I'm picking out my wardrobe. Should I look like a librarian Or should I look like I'm single and ready to mingle? After all, you never know who you might meet. I settled on heels, slacks, and a shirt that covered just enough cleavage to keep my chest hair from making a surprise appearance. Ding dong. Joe opened the door, and it smelled like somebody had tipped over the outhouse. His home was as dark as the inside of my wallet. As I stepped inside and looked down to my left, there was a tiny makeshift card table with casino ants playing a game of poker. The ante was ripe mango. As I stepped further into his living room, I was completely stunned at what I saw. His home was filled of canines of every kind. A monocle framed the right eye of a St. Bernard who reclined in a lazy boy chair. His tongue dangled out of his mouth, and a line of spit fell from his tongue all the way down to the floor. In the other chair was a black greyhound whose arms and legs draped over the chair, and his fur was decorated with white spots. And on the rest of the furniture was corgis and pugs and bulldogs and greyhounds and every kind of dog. And then there was one bug-eyed chihuahua. Now, all those eyes were on a big screen because on it was the National Dog Show. As each breed was presented, there was yips and yaps and yelps and an occasional whoop escaped the throat of the St. Bernard. Was this Joe's idea of a party? I mean, where were all the other people? Just then I was snapped back into reality by a tap on the shoulder. Would you like something to drink? Yes, please. Boomer, bring some drinks. Bounding out of the kitchen came a red-haired kangaroo. She smiled, put her paw in her pouch, and pulled out a Pepsi. I took it, all I could really do was kind of smile and nod back. I was also a little bit hungry, but I didn't want to ask for food for fear of what hole it may come out of. Would you like to go in the back? At this point, I didn't want to go anywhere but back home. When Joe opened the screen door to the back of the house, I was completely flabbergasted. The pool was crowded with sea lions and seahorses playing a rowdy game of water volleyball. That multi-colored rubber ball bounced from side to side to side, while an overhead owl took score on the iPad. And over on the right of the lawn was a hard-shelled tortoise. He moseyed through the grass, mumbling something about losing his contact lenses. And then on the patio furniture were chickens and one thirsty rooster. Now I could tell by the way he puffed his cigar and flirted with the chickens that he was a frequent visitor to the hen house. I had to think of a strategy to get out of there fast. As I edged back into the living room, I pulled my cell phone out of my purse and pretended to read a text. I'm sorry, Joe. I have to go home. My dog Henry is in a crate and my roommate won't be there in enough time to let him out. Joe's face flushed beet red. All the dog eyes turned to me, and then the Chihuahua spoke. You eat your dog? Pointing out of the kitchen came that red-haired kangaroo. She stood up on her hind feet and like a prize fighter took a swing at my head. Well, luckily, I'm pretty agile for a middle-aged woman, and I was able to duck. Like popcorn, the rest of the dogs popped off the couch and started after me. I took a run toward the door, and I could feel the pieces of sticky mango clinging to my ankle. I barely made it out of the door before that bug-eyed chihuahua burst forward to take a bite of my behind. Now I'm outside and I know I have to get out of the area soon. So I jumped on my pig and flew away. Back to you.
Oh, Camille Miller. That was incredible. And one of my favorite parts of this whole thing, Camille, is that the other day I asked you before this whole thing, I was like, can you just give me like a little summary of what your story was? And you said to me, oh yeah, it's a 6-minute story about a date with a coworker. That's what you said. Yeah. So not at all what I expected. That was the perfect setup to your punchline. Incredible. So great, beautifully told, and hilarious. I hope you could see the little boxes. We were doubled over. Wonderful. All right, let's move on. Our next storyteller, I'm going to do this a little in the inverse of how we did it before. I'm going to tell you what the tall tale version of the text is, and then what the tale itself. So the short version of, here he is, Lee Amantangelo. How are you doing, Lee?
Doing well.
Good. So Lee's 10-word or less tall tale for his text was: Swedish scammer uses Microsoft coffee gift lure. Fish elsewhere. This is a summation of, one of those scam emails that you get that are like, you have won a Keurig coffee maker, with like all the text is broken up, like the spaces are in weird places, so that somehow your spam filter is not going to catch it or what have you, offering you some free thing that you're never going to get. Well, wonderful. And a perfect setup for the story that you're about to hear. So please put your hands together for Lee Amantangelo and his story, Grandpa Goes Squirrel Fishing.
All right, kids, gather around. Take a knee over here by your grandpappy. It's story time. What story do you want to hear today? Oh, the governor? You want the governor too? Okay, well, tell that story. That story took place about 15 years ago when old Blue over here in his bed by the fireplace was just a young pup. He's half black gold retriever and half black Alaskan collie. Best friend I ever had and my best fishing partner too. I actually think he likes to go fishing more than I do, mostly because your grandmammy doesn't come along, but don't say anything about that. So we got up real early that Saturday morning. We packed up our fishing gear and put our boat on the truck, and we were down the highway before the sun even began to smile at us. 2 hours later, we arrived at our favorite lake. Now, this lake was very peculiar. It had many inlets and little coves, and we had our very favorite fishing spot in that entire lake. It was a little cove that once we got our boat on the water, it took us about 20 minutes to get there. And you can tell this cove because it had a very peculiar structure in it. There was a rock that jutted up out of the water about 3 feet. It was practically cylindrical and it had a flat top. And we called that structure the obelisk. When we saw that in the cove, we knew we found our spot. And we would set up, we'd get our poles ready, our lines would be in the water, and then we'd start to take our napping. We started to fish. We started fishing. And after a while, we got a bump on the boat. Now, every time we went to this cove, we'd always get a little bump on the boat. And old Blue knew what that meant. And he'd run up onto the edge of the boat and he'd look over and down below, we saw the meanest, the biggest, the most elusive big mouth bass. And we knew that was that bass because it was solid white, albino. And we knew that he ruled the lake, and he would look up at us with a smirk on his face like, you'll never catch me, and then he'll dart off, and we didn't see him. Well, old Blue would stay on the side of that boat for another 5 minutes looking to see if the governor would come back. Eventually, we both settled back into our napping. Fishing. And so we were there fishing. All of a sudden, we heard some ruckus over by the obelisk, and we woke up. And we looked and we saw the water all splashing, and then all of a sudden it went just perfectly still. We started to get back to our position. All of a sudden we both double taked at the same time. I looked at old Blue and I said, Was that there before? Right, sitting on top of the obelisk was a walnut. Walnut? How did that get there? That wasn't there before, was it? I don't think so either. Hell, we went back to our nap. I mean fishing. We went back to fishing, and we were there fishing for a few more minutes, 10 minutes, 15. We heard another ruckus. This time it wasn't on the water. It was on the shore. Right by where the obelisk was, obelisk about 12 feet away from the shoreline, we saw a squirrel. And he started rustling up the trunk of this old snag, this dead tree. And he gets up there and he gets on a big branch, and then he starts coming down the branch. And all of a sudden you could see he was really timid. Every time he took a step, that branch started to fall more and more. And eventually it got just a couple of inches on the top of that obelisk. And that old squirrel jumped down on the obelisk and he grabbed that walnut like it was a big prize. And he was jumping around for joy. And then all of a sudden, he realized something. He looked up. When he jumped off that branch, it recoiled up about 3.5 feet. And he looked at that branch with a major concern on his face, almost like a Democrat hearing that Donald Trump won the election. I mean, he was concerned. He looked at that branch up there. He took that wallet, put it in his cheek, and he scurried down the obelisk a little bit and got a run at it. And then he stopped at the top. And he was like looking like, I can do this. And he went back down the obelisk and he took a run and he jumped and he hit just the top of the branch with his little paw, but it didn't grab. And he went plummeting down into the water, and there was a big splash, and we saw a squirrel tail, and we saw a fish tail, and we saw a squirrel tail and a fish tail, and then all of a sudden that water just went flat. And old Blue was on the side of the boat, wondering what that was. I looked it up and said, Blue, did you see that? And we sat there looking at that obelisk and that water, wondering what we just saw. Well, we went back to, let's just call it what it is, meditating. We went back to our meditating with our poles out and our lines in the water. And we sat there and we meditated for a while. And again, we were awakened rudely by some noise over by the obelisk. And we looked over and we saw this big mouth bass jump out of the water. And it placed a walnut right on the top of the obelisk and went right back down into the water. We couldn't believe our eyes. Blue, did you see that? We sat there staring at that obelisk and that walnut for the next 15 minutes. Not a sound, the water flat as can be. Well, we went back to our meditating. And we were meditating for quite a while when all of a sudden old Blue's line started to get something, and Blue's knows what to do. He steps on that pole and I grab that pole and he goes to the edge of the boat and I'm reeling and I'm reeling and I'm reeling. And just as the fish came up, old Blue grabs the line in his mouth and flops that fish into the boat and he steps on it. And we couldn't believe our eyes. Sitting in our boat was the governor. This huge albino big mouth bass that we've been trying to hunt for 15 years. And I looked at old Blue and I said, Blue, you think we ought to throw old governor back in the water? It's your fish. It was your line. You want to keep him? And Blue's very particular. Blue did not like that governor. Just then, it started to get dark. And old Grandmammy don't like it when we come home after dark. I said, Blue, we got to go. So we put that old fish in a big cooler and we took our boat back to the shore and we headed down that highway as fast as we could. And sure enough, we come pulling into the farm and there's your Grandmammy walking and fretting up and down the porch. And she finally sees us and gives us a smile and then it turns into anger. You know how that goes, right? Where you two been? It's dark out already. Oh, hush, old woman, we got a prize for you. And we took the cooler over to her and opened it up and we said, we did it today. We got the governor. You got the governor? We got the governor. Go in and clean that fish. We're going to put the fishing gear away. We're in the barn, putting the boat and the gear away. And all of a sudden we hear your Grandmammy yelling from the kitchen. What you doing, old man? You playing a trick on me? What you talking about, old woman? What you fretting about? There's a squirrel inside this fish. Back to you, Corey.
Lee and Tangelo, fantastic. Oh, you had me, man. You had me the whole time. I loved it. I love the way your story just had these wonderful kind of refrains and bits and rising action. Beautiful, beautifully done. And makes me want to go meditating out in the water. All right. Thank you so much. Lee is represented also, I don't think I mentioned this top, representing the Story Masters. So thank you for participating. And this is maybe a good opportunity for our audience who hasn't really been kind of represented here. Go ahead, if you wouldn't mind, put in the chat, where are you watching tonight's show from? Where in the world are you? Are you in California? Are you some specific city? Go ahead and put that in there while we, oh, look at that. Wow. We are truly already representing our state. We have people from Northern California, Walnut Creek, California, Southern California, San Diego. We have Seattle. We have someone who's in the restroom. We're really representing all the best that California has to offer. Petaluma, Berkeley, Santa Maria, Texas, my favorite part of California. Bremerton, Washington, Oakland, CA. Oh, hi, Eleanor. Bobby's in Oakland and John's in Davis. Fabulous. Well, keep putting those in there. Nice. And thanks again for coming. Let's bring up our next storyteller, also from the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. In fact, not just from the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. Joyce Ormond, I heard that there was so you're muted currently, so you might want to unmute. But I heard that there's an exciting development with your affiliation. You want to tell us what that is? You don't say.
You're muted, Joyce.
Really? No, you're still muted, Joyce. Yeah. Yes. Do you know how to unmute yourself?
Well, this story starts.
There you go. Oh, okay. I'm just going to turn it over. Ladies and
Okay.
gentlemen, give it up for Joyce Ormond. Woohoo.
Go ahead, Joyce.
Okay. Well, this story starts in the gold country. My great grandfather, Billy Ball, lived on a ranch with a Consumnes River running through it. Now, old Guinness was a gold panner, and he wanted to live on the river. So he talked to my great grandfather, and he gave him permission to set up camp. Now, old Guinness, he lived there for a long time. And over the time, Billy, my great grandfather, and old Guinness, they got to know each other pretty well. They'd sit around the campfire and empty a bottle or two of good rye whiskey. And they'd tell stories, true. And old Guinness was from Ireland. And so his stories were, well, they were a little of a stretch. But old Guinness said he brought all of Ireland's mythical characters. He had leprechauns and banshees and all that with him. They were in the camp. He knew that because stuff was missing. Well, one day, while they were sharing the rye whiskey, old Gillis says, Bill, I got to tell you something. A few days ago, there was a coyote coming down the hill. Well, I got my shotgun and I shot him. But I was getting dark and I didn't want to skin him. So I went up the next morning and I couldn't find that coyote. Well, but I saw a few drops of blood going around behind the bushes, and in the crack between a rock and where the hill came down. And I looked, and by George, there was a wedge that could come out. Well, I'm curious. I pulled it out, and it was a tiny place, but I could sort of see, and it looked like it got bigger. So I'm kind of scrawny. I got down in there and I squeezed and scrunched until there was a big room with a dome, and there was light coming, just dim light from somewhere. And the floor was covered with white sand, smooth as silk. And I looked at that sand and I thought, where did this come from? Oh, and then as my eyes adjusted, I saw in the middle a big pile of burlap bags or pouches maybe, but not as big as sacks. Well, I walked on that sand and I left footprints. And when I reached over to touch the bag, it just disintegrated, and all these gold nuggets came tumbling out. Well, some of them landed on that white sand, and they were shiny and they were beautiful. And I picked up one and I just went to put it in my pocket, and the bright lights and lightning, and the banshees were yowling, and everything was, well, I dropped that nugget right there, and I knew the wee people had control of that room. And I went scrunching out and out into the sun, and I came back to camp. Well, now, you just can't leave something like that. That gold must belong to a leprechaun. And if a leprechaun's in control, there's money to be made if you know how to do it. So I went back, crawled inside, but this time I didn't go. And the sand was as smooth as silk. My footprints were gone, and the gold was all piled up on top. But I stood up and I stayed back in a crevice, and I looked across. There, curled around that big stack of gold, was a gold and green serpent, about 20 feet long, a girth of a good 4 feet. Nobody ever saw a serpent like that. That was a leprechaun. Had big fangs. Well, I knew if I could get that leprechaun in my little leprechaun bottle container, sealed up, he may complain, but sooner or later, he'd give me all my gold for his freedom, because that's what leprechauns do. So I came back, and I'm working real hard, Billy. I'm working real hard on a plan. It'll take me quite a while. Oh, Guinness, it's not worth it. You're going to risk everything for nothing, maybe. Oh, no. No, 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 no. I'm going to make a good plan. Well, time went on. One day while they were sitting around the fire, emptying another bottle of good Irish rye whiskey, Guinness says, Billy, I got a plan, and this is it. I'm going to take the time to construct a very good container for a leprechaun. I'm going to go in quiet as can be. And then I'm going to start singing an Irish jig, and I'm going to dance, and I'm going to make noise. I'm going to wake that serpent up, and that serpent is going to rise up to almost the roof, and it's going to charge me with its mouth open and its fangs. And I'm going to crouch down, and I'm going to run, and I'm going to run right through his mouth and down all the way to his tail. I'm going to grab that tail, and I'm going to run all the way out, and I have to get out before he closes his mouth. I'm going to turn that serpent inside out. He's going to have to turn back into a leprechaun to save his life. I'm going to grab him. I'm going to put him in my container, and he's going to give me all his gold for his freedom. Oh, Guinness. That sounds like a stupid plan to me. You're going to risk your life for a bunch of gold. Never going to happen. Well, I'm going to train. I'm going to train. I'm going to practice my running. I'm going to practice my pulling skills. Then one night, they were sitting around emptying another bottle of Irish rye whiskey. And Guinness said, Billy, I'm ready. Ah, Gillis, it's not worth it. Ah, but it is, Billy, it is. Well, about 2 weeks later, my grandpa, Billy Ball, went to check on old Guinness. The camp was gone. Everything was, he didn't see any signs of Billy. He didn't see any signs of old Guinness or anybody else. He worried about that. What happened to Guinness? Well, a few months later, when he went into town for supplies, he asked around, have you seen old Guinness? Have you seen old Guinness? All the answers were no. Well, he went into the saloon to get himself a glass of old rye whiskey. And the bartender said, hey, Billy, what you so down about? Well, I've been looking for old Guinness and I just can't find anybody that's on. Well, you know what? I can't tell for sure, but about 2 weeks ago, I saw an old man come in through the saloon to the hotel. Looked sort of like Guinness. He rented a room, ordered a bath, warm bath, a haircut, and a shave, and he sent the bar boy out for a suit of clothes. He went out the next morning. Now, I couldn't tell you, I talked to him, I couldn't tell you whether that was Guinness or not. I never saw Guinness look like that. And you know what? He wasn't as old as we thought, if that was him. And I'm not sure. But he had 3 big trunks, heavy trunks with locks on them. And I saw him myself. He got on the stagecoach to Sacramento. Now, my great granddad, Billy Ball, told that story to my grandmother, and my grandmother told that story to my father, and my father told that story to me up on the river, right where old Guinness had his campground. Did old Guinness return to Ireland rich, or is he in the belly of a serpent? What do you think?
Joyce Ormond. Fabulous. Is that really a family story? Was that really passed down to you?
Well, sort of, yes.
Okay, you can make it up. You can lie.
Well, there was a miner. He was
Yeah.
Irish.
I
And
love it.
leprechauns and gold always go with miners.
Always.
My
always.
my grandmother told me, and my father and my Aunt Pug told me many, many stories about leprechauns and banshees and fairies and toadstools.
Great. Well, thanks for taking us there. Give it up one more time for Joyce Ormond. Beautiful. The new president of the Sacramento Storytelling Guild. All right, we are moving on now to the Foothill Storytellers Guild, to Eric Hurt. Hello, Eric.
Hello there. Hello,
Hi
everyone.
there. Hi. Great to see you. Hi. Yeah, give him a wiggle. Give him a wiggle. Great. And Eric, your last text was, I didn't know you were going to be using the car. I should have asked too. Spontaneous decision. And I love your tall tale version of this. You said, missing half a brain causes me to move like lightning. I think we can all relate to that.
Words or less. So
Yes, beautiful. All right. Do you need any more setup? Or are you ready to go?
all set.
Let's do it. All right, give it up for Eric Hurt. Woohoo.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So do any of you, or have you ever heard of, I should say, do you happen to know what a mule man is? Mule, M-U-L-E, a mule man. Well, I asked a friend of mine once, and he told me that a mule man was where you took a mule and a man and well, it turns out I asked the wrong person. About 100 years ago or so, if you wanted to go, so let's say deer hunting in the backcountry in the Sierra Nevadas, this was back before there were lots of roads, you'd have to hire yourself a horse and a pack mule and a guide. They were known as wranglers or muleteers or mule men. And there just happened to be this one mule man who was quite special. He used to talk about himself as being the most quick-witted man alive. He used to say that he could, well, when I say quick-witted, that refers to when it comes to mules and snakes and deer. He used to say that he could stand out in the woods and he could just stand there, and his ears were he could hear so clearly that the trees around him, he could hear them grow. And as for his sight, well, his eyes were so strong that he could see around the mountain peaks. And he was known for shooting. He actually was a really good shot. He could shoot he could shoot at any animal, but strangely enough, any animal he shot at, he always seemed to hit some other animal instead. And then he had this dog, this mangy dog, this barky dog. It had a frightful bark. In fact, one day it barked itself scared right up a tree where it died. And unfortunately, that dog won't be joining us in this story. But as for the mule man, he could outbest the best most of the time. But this is a story about one time that he didn't. It was right before deer hunting season, and he and one of his pals, another muleteer, they were hired to take a group of deer hunters into the backcountry. And the mule man, he was boasting to his pal about how he was going to shoot the first buck that season. And his pal disagreed and said, no, that wasn't going to be so. And so the two men, they made a bet. They bet $1 that whoever would shoot the first buck, well, they'd win the bet. So basically a buck for a buck. And I want you to know, back then, $1 was a lot, it was worth a lot more than it is today. Back then, $1 was worth $1. And on the day of right before deer season was to open, it was the morning of deer season. The two men, they were in their car, and they were driving up to the corral to go to where the horses and the mules were stabled. They were going to meet their first deer hunting party up there. And as they're driving up, they were going up this road called Rattlesnake Drive, which was a very narrow road. And as they were going, they I don't know what they drove over, but their car, it bounced up and down, and then all of a sudden behind them, they heard what sounded like some angry, flat-footed man chasing after them, kind of a thump, 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 thump. And so they pulled over and they got out and they took a look. And sure enough, the tire was flat. There was no life in it. And the muleteer, he thought for a moment, being quick-witted, the quick-witted man that he was, hold on. And he stepped away and he went over the side of the road and he walked up and down the road and he saw this row of rattlesnake holes. and he rolled up his sleeve and he stuck his arm into one of the rattlesnake holes, and he grabbed hold, and well, he found a snake, but it was too small. So he moved on down to the next hole and he stuck his arm in the hole, and he found that snake was actually quite big, and so he carefully let it go and backed off and went down to the next hole and stuck his arm in the hole, and he found a snake that was just right. So he grabbed it by the tail and he pulled it out, and it was a nice 36-inch long snake. Now, when it comes to snakes, you always measure them in inches because, well, snakes don't have feet. And he took that snake and he took that the teeth of that snake by the head with the teeth, and he went over to the tire and he stuck those teeth into the tire, and the tire began to swell, and it swelled and swelled until finally the tire was good as new. And so the two pals, they continued their drive up to the corral where they met with the hunting group. They each got their horses, they packed up their mules, and off into the back country they went. They rode through meadows, they rode around mountain peaks until they came to a valley that had a river down below. Now, to get down to the river, there was this path, a narrow path, it was kind of like a Z that went back and forth all the way down to the bottom. And as they were going along this path, one of the mules got a little too close to the edge and stepped over, and all of a sudden its feet were over its head, feet overhead, feet overhead, feet overhead, feet overhead, until it landed at the bottom. And well, when the dust cleared, there was the mule looking up at him, and it was saying something like, "Come on, come on, come on," as if to tell him, "Take the shortcut, it's easy." Well, these men, being manly men, they decided that no, they were going to do it the hard way. And so they made their way down the path slowly, and about halfway down, the mule man, he saw off in the distance with his sharp eyes, he saw a 10-pointed buck off in the distance. Now, he was sure that nobody else saw it. He decided that buck was going to be his, and just remember about it. And so anyway, they make their way down to the river, and they along the river, they find their way to a place called 8-Hour Echo Canyon. They set up camp there for the night. And right before bed, the mule man, he, "Wake up!" And then everyone went to bed. And in the morning, about 8 hours later, there came roaring through the valley this, "Wake up, wake up." So, of course, everybody got up. Now, the deer hunting party, they all wanted to do a little fishing before they went out hunting. And the mule man, he thought that was his chance. So he told everybody that he was going to go see a man about a horse over there behind the trees. And so he grabbed his rifle and he went off. And as soon as he was behind those trees, he hightailed it to where he saw that buck the day before. And when he got there, he looked around and he listened, and he could hear that buck breathing. He was still in that area, and he looked over, and there it was. And he could see it's a 10-point, but the buck, it was laying down on the other side of the log, so the mule man could only see the top of the buck's head. And so he took his gun and he waited and he waited, and that buck just seemed to want to sit there forever. And that mule man didn't have it forever, and well, neither do we. So that mule man, he thought for a moment, and he thought, he remembered a time when he was in a similar predicament, and there was a doe that was on the other side of a log. And to get that doe to stand up, he had yelled out, "Hey, look, it's a naked buck." And that did the trick. So he decided he would try that on this buck. And he took a moment and, "Hey, look, it's a doe naked." Well, I don't know if he told that buck something new or if that buck was just curious, but that buck stood straight up, and that mule man, pow! He shot that buck in the back. It just dropped down. The mule man was a kind-hearted man, and he didn't like to see animals suffer. So he went over to where the buck was, and he set his rifle down, and he swung his leg over the buck, and he grabbed hold of the antlers with one hand, and he pulled out his cold metal hunting knife, and he placed it right up to the neck of that buck. And then all of a sudden, the buck stood straight up. Now, a few minutes before, when that mule man had shot at that buck, well, being the mule man that he was, when he shot, he hit an animal, but it wasn't that buck. He shot some poor squirrel out of a tree. And as for that buck, well, when he heard that gun go off, he just thought he was a goner, and all the blood rushed from his head, and he just fell asleep. Well, when that cold knife was up against his neck, that buck, it woke straight up with that mule man right on his back, holding the antlers, and away they went. The mule man, he dropped his knife, and they're running through the woods, running through the woods. Well, the mule man, he had to hold on, so he reached back, reaching for the tail, but he actually reached back a little too far back beyond the tail and reached it back underneath it, and he was scared and fearful, and he was squeezing as hard as he could, and thinking he was grabbing hold, squeezing that tail, and those bucks, well, its eyes were going this way, they're going that way a little bit, then this way a little bit, and they're running through the woods, running through the woods. Well, the mule man found that if he pulled the antlers one way, well, the buck would go this way. And if he pushed this way, the buck would go that way. Well, they got all turned around until the mule man got that buck aimed straight for that hunting camp. And they're going as fast as they can. The mule man squeezing what he thought was the tail, and those buck's eyes going every which way. And they're getting close to camp, and the mule man, get your guns, I'm bringing in supper. And men are starting to run around the camp, and that buck's racing right for it. And then there, straight ahead of him, is his pal, the other mule too, with his gun. Pow! The buck stopped. The buck stopped right there. And the mule man, he flew through the air, hit his head against a tree. And I don't know which hurt more. The fact that the mule man's head had swelled 10 times, or the fact that his pal had won the bet. For the rest of that hunting trip, his pal would rib him about the fact that he had lost. And I want you all to know that was the only time in that mule man's life that he ever lost a bet for a buck. Thank you.
And the buck stopped there. Fantastic, Eric. That was a masterclass in action storytelling, in emotional storytelling. Beautifully done. Thank you for that. And it's a good reminder also that we have a sponsor tonight. I don't know if you guys know, there was a sponsor. Tonight's show sponsored by the SPCAIS, which is the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty of Animals in Stories. And you'll see a theme tonight through many unfortunate animal
It's great, Corey.
endings.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful. All right.
Plug.
I'm excited. We're moving on to someone from the Do Tell Story Swap. Sharon. Hello, Sharon. Do tell.
Hi,
You're
Corey.
up in Sonoma area, as I recall, right? Santa Rosa.
That's right. Mhm.
Terrific. And are you still doing Tuesday nights? When is your
Yes,
regular
first Tuesday of the month.
first Tuesday of the month? Terrific. I've got to make it up there. I've been really wanting to.
Yes, you should visit.
Join you. Great. All right. Well, your original text message that I asked you to reinterpret as a tall tale was no problem. 7 o'clock works for me. And I got to say, you gave me one of the best answers that anybody gave me, which is that you said that actually the original message is the tall tale because 7 o'clock was the worst possible time for that meeting. Don't tell, you said, but I'm telling because that's what I do. Anyway, I'm excited to hear your story, and I'm guessing there's going to be cruelty to animals in it, isn't there? I'm just kidding. All right, please put your hands together for your next wonderful storyteller from the Do Tell Story Swap, the one and only Sharon Elwell.
Well, we're back up at a lake where our family was taking its annual vacation, camping peacefully for a couple of weeks. And our youngest daughter, Lucy, decided that she wanted to try fishing for the very first time. I should preface this by saying that I don't usually tell this story because nobody ever believes me. And I wouldn't have believed it myself if I had not seen what happened when Lucy went fishing. So if you don't believe me, I won't hold it against you. Out in the boat we went, and there's Lucy with her little fishing rod. And as we all know about beginner's luck, she caught a fish on her very first cast. Well, the problem was it wasn't a very big fish. It was actually probably 2 inches long. And I don't know how it even got the hook in its mouth because I don't think it was big enough. But Lucy, of course, was thrilled until we said, well, you have to throw it back in. It's too small. And she said, oh, let me keep it. I want to keep it. I said, no. It wouldn't even make a bite. We can't cook fish that size. And she said, I don't want to keep it to eat. I want it for a pet. Let me have it like a goldfish. Now, I might have mentioned that Lucy's our youngest, and we don't say no to her if we can help it. So we took the big bucket that we use for camping, and she filled it with lake water and threw in that little fish. And when we got back to shore, the fish was still alive in the bucket. And so then came the next problem. What do you feed it? No insects are going to land in that bucket. But Lucy had a plan. So she took one of her Cheerios and she crumbled into dust and sprinkled it in the bucket. And sure enough, that little fish came right up to the top and munched away on those tiny chunks of Cheerios. Problem solved. Well, what happened was that from then on, every time Lucy went up to that bucket and peeked in, the fish swam across and looked up at her. I thought that was so interesting because I don't think fish can be trained. So I'm watching pretty carefully, and I went and peeked into that bucket and didn't pay any attention to me. It just kept swimming around and around. But every time Lucy got near, the fish would swim up and see what was going on with her and whether she was going to feed it. And then one day, after feeding, as Lucy was walking away, that fish flipped itself up out of the bucket and landed on the dirt right behind her. I thought, oh no, fish suicide. I hate to see a thing like that, and it's going to traumatize Lucy. But no, that fish just stood up on its little tiny fins and began walking along, following her. Well, I quickly went on Wikipedia to find out whether that was even possible. I know there are lungfish that go dormant during the dry season until there's water, and I myself have seen an octopus walk across the beach. So I was not entirely surprised that this little lake fish could follow her around for a while. But day after day, everywhere that Lucy went, the fish was right behind. And at night, it hopped up on her sleeping bag, just like a puppy or a kitten. It was kind of amazing. But when we got ready to go home, that was when the tricky part happened. But even Lucy had to admit that she didn't see that fish following her up the stairs or onto the school bus or around on the playground. The sad thing was the fish was going to have to remain behind. And so we all trooped down to the edge of the water. And I wish I could tell you that this story has a happy ending, but it does not, so brace yourself. For just as Lucy took that fish in her hands and gently threw him into the lake, he flopped for a couple of minutes. And then before we could jump in to save him, he drowned. And that's the end of that tale.
A heartbreaking story. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
But beautifully told and so vividly illustrated. So thank you for that. I loved all of the details of that, and I loved your authenticity. And there's a lot that you did really well. So nice work. Thank you. You guys, I can't believe it. We are down to our last storyteller. Where has this really? It's flown. It's incredible. And I'm not going to say we saved the best for last, but it's Ed Lewis, everybody, right? Ed Lewis. Ed, well, I want to also tell people before I fully introduce you that after Ed's story, don't just leave, because we have a little tradition here. We're going to actually bring all the storytellers back so we can kind of open it up for, the sort of a curtain call, final moment. We'll also do a couple of announcements, including stuff about what's coming up after, like next month's show, things like that. and other things like that. And then we'll also even invite you, the audience, to turn your cameras on and join us in a little gathering at the end. So so don't go away. But Ed Lewis, I'm so excited to hear your story tonight. Ed, when I asked you the question about the last text, yours actually was about fishing. It's like this crazy theme of the night has emerged. And you said, your text was, I can go fishing on the 29th. I'll pencil you in my calendar. And then your tall tale version said, my boss wanted to go fishing on the 29th, but that darn eraser on my pencil had a mind of its own. All right, give it up for Ed Lewis, everybody.
Thank you. So you may have heard of the bridge to nowhere that was going from Ketchikan, Alaska to Gravina Island in the early 2000s. And Gravina Island had 50 people in their population. Well, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska had proposed this extreme expenditure, and Sarah Palin, who was then the presidential candidate, backed him, and it was going through until people really identified this as pork barrel spending, and in 2006 it was defunded. Well, the story I'm going to tell you is about Gravina Island, but it comes from Gravina Island in 1919. My mother was born there. There were 100 people in the town. They had 6 of them, and everyone fished the waters around the island, or they worked on boats. And they'd spend their evenings sitting around a campfire or a fireplace and cooking up salmon and making all kinds of great dishes. And my mother told me this story when I was really young, and I've taken that story and made it into my own. So there was once a family of bears that lived deep in the forest of Gravina Island in a lavish castle. And every morning they would have their favorite breakfast food created by their chef. It was, get ready for this, organic kale porridge. Oh, I mean, can you imagine how good that must taste? Well, you know, Papa Bear sat down first, as was the custom, and took a bite of his organic kale porridge, and he spit it onto the ground and said to the chef, "This porridge is too hot." What was it? Yeah, too hot. Well, Mama Bear took a bite of her organic kale porridge, and she also spit it on the ground and said, "This porridge is as cold as my nightly pina coladas. I cannot stand this." And she spit it on the ground also. Well, Baby Bear, of course, tried his organic kale porridge, and as we all can imagine, it was just right. Well, they needed to go to their happy place. And so every morning they would leave their castle and they would go for a walk into the forest where they would meditate and practice their yoga. And they were doing that and they're getting ready to go out. And Mama Bear said, hey, did you hear in the shortwave last night that Lox Goldie had escaped from the maximum security prison at the north end of the island? Well, I had heard something about that. And we're going to be safe. As you see, I put 3 deadbolts on the door here. And, you know, she's a woman and she's small and, you know, she's probably not very strong. You know that is. And so no problem. We're just going to be safe. So they headed out. Well, unbeknownst to them, Lox Goldie was sleeping in their golden chariot. And she had heard everything they said. And she came out of that chariot and with a karate kick and a karate chop, she smashed in that door. And then organic kale porridge. She had a long hike through the north end of the island down to the south end of the island, and she was famished. So she sat down and she took a spoonful of that Papa Bear's organic kale porridge, spit it out because, you know, it was, it was too hot, right? Same thing with Mama Bear. She took that bite and it was, of course, too cold. She spit that out, but then she went to Baby Bear's and she ate all that porridge. Oh, it was so delicious. And then she did what she had wanted to do. She got her bags and she loaded up all the kale, all the oats, bowls, spoons, the rest of the silverware. She got she got the refrigerator, most of the furniture, some of the really great artwork, and she loaded them in the stolen U-Haul truck that she had gotten on the way down. But you know, she was tired, and so she said, I can take a little nap, and if these bears come, they're going to run for me. I can guarantee that. So she went upstairs and she saw that nice little bed with, you know, Baby Bear's bed, and it was just right. So she went there and she just went to sleep immediately. Well, after their morning meditation and the yoga, they were feeling at peace again. They came back and they saw that the door was off the hinges, and they sneaked quietly inside and they heard upstairs. Well, they hightailed it out. They got in that golden chariot and they took off, and they headed all the way in this magic chariot down to Northern California, where most of us live. And they started an organic kale farm, and they were so successful. Their ancestors, I go out to Cape Valley and get organic kale porridge from their ancestors. I mean, it's, and of course, I've learned from my mother how to make the best organic kale porridge. And if you ever want to come over sometime, come on over. Well, you know, this is a story that has been passed down and, you know, modified. And if you would like to take this story and tell it, I'd encourage you to go ahead and modify it yourself. And all you have to do is send me royalty checks up to Fast Eddie on Gravina Island in an abandoned castle. Thank you.
Ed Lewis. Perfect closer. And probably the most, you know, Pacific Northwest / California fairy tale I've ever heard, right? That was perfect. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Beautiful. Well, that is our show. So let's welcome back to the screen all of our storytellers first, and allow us in the chat, maybe audience, to give your love, give your adulation to this incredible collection. And while they are coming back, I want to just say some thanks. I want to thank all of the guilds that are represented here: Sacramento Storytellers Guild, Contra Costa Tale Spinners, Story Masters, Foothill Storytellers Guild, Do Tell Story Swap, of course, the SAC board, Shags. I want to thank you for running the Zoom tonight. And great job, everybody.
I have one thing I'd like to say. My cousin Ralph, whose father is my uncle, lives up in the San Juan Islands, and I see that he's on here, and now he's living close to that in Anacortes. But he knows about the last, of course. But our parents were born on a small island. It didn't have to be Gravina Island, but a small island up there. So Ralph, I'm glad you're here and that you got to
love it. I love that detail. Hey, Ed, real quick, would you tell us what's coming up? What's next month? What's the process? Some people in the chat were asking me if this is every month. Would you give a little, what's what for people who might be new here?
Okay, so this event happens every month. Every month we have a new genre, and I put out a notice to all of our swap groups in California, the 15 swap groups we have, and they can nominate somebody to be a teller for us. And next month are stories of love. And then the following month, I don't remember all of them now, the exact order, but there's myths, there's historical, there's fairy tales, humorous, a whole variety of genres. And we really like this idea of having people share different types of stories, because often we hear a lot of personal stories, and maybe some folk tales, but sometimes we don't get enough of the others. So we have that. And so it's always the third Wednesday of the month. You can go to the Storytelling Association of California website, and you just log on and punch it in, and like you've done for this event.
Fantastic. Thanks. Well, it was great. Do any of the storytellers, before we open it up to the audience, any of the storytellers have anything that you want to promote? Tell us
I
something
do.
that's
I
coming up.
do.
Sharon, yes, go for it.
Yeah, because I was wrong when I told my one chance to pitch the Do Tell Story Group, and it doesn't meet on the first Tuesday. It meets on the second Tuesday of every month at 7:00. And we would love to have people from all over. We've had people join us from New York, and I'm in Washington, and everyone is invited. So there,
Oh,
gave you the right
Zoom.
time.
It's a Zoom.
We
online?
Zoom, yeah, we completely Zoom.
Super.
Yeah.
So
All right,
Zoom,
thank
Zoom
you.
on in with us.
All right, Joyce, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, this Saturday we have the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. On the third Saturday of every month, we have a program, and this month is hosted by Vicki Carroll, and it's childhood stories.
Mm.
And then in the spring, on May, we are having the very first Sacramento Valley Storytelling Festival.
Ooh,
It's a brand new, and we're hoping to grow it over the next 5 years so that we can have a 2 or 3 day event.
I love it.
But
Sacramento
anybody who
Valley
wants to
Storytelling
donate
Festival.
can to our success, Sacramento Storytellers Guild.org, and there's a little button. You can donate now to the festival.
Super.
And
Maybe
you
you could
can
just
get it
put
on.
that in the chat if there's a link. Yeah. There you go.
And you can
On
buy a
top.
ticket also. Tickets are
Oh, yes, you can
$25.
buy a ticket also, but
And Corey is one of our featured
Tellers.
tellers and
I
workshop
am.
leaders, along with Willie Claflin and
Claire Hennessy.
Claire Hennessy, yes, I will be leading, I think, a workshop
Yeah.
and also telling a few stories. I'm very excited for that. So that's going to be the Sacramento Storytellers Guild.org for that info. It's coming up. It's
And
in
Willie
May, I believe.
Clafton
Yeah,
will be there.
and Willie, of course. Cool. Anybody else? Any other storytellers? Anything you got coming up you want to let
Hi,
us know about?
Donna Washington here.
Oh, hi,
Glad I got a
Donna.
chance to pop in this evening and just say hello to people. And just a quick shout out that Assist Artists Standing Strong Together has 4 programs a month. And all you want to do, if you want to find out about it, just go to our Facebook page or artiststandingstrongtogether.net. We're always looking for people who are interested in telling stories. We meet
Wonderful.
every single Monday, starting at 4:00. For we share best practices and have a community over there, and it's always fun to drop in. So you're welcome to join Assist at any moment.
It's
Great.
4:00 Eastern time.
Yes, sorry, 4:00 Eastern time.
Yeah.
And I'm in my
4 o'clock.
pajamas, which is why my camera is off.
Because it's 11:28 Eastern time. I guess.
Yes, and I'm about to go to bed.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Cool. Why don't we invite, if anybody else wants to, how do we do this? Just go to the
So
gallery.
I'll just remove the highlight for everybody, and then everybody will
Yeah.
come up.
The
So-
highlight, and if you just if everyone wants to click on gallery view, you'll see everybody with their cameras on. People who have their cameras off, if you want to say hello before you sign off, just turn your camera on for a wave and show us your funny pajamas. There you are. Great. There's Donna.
Yeah, Betsy's been a teller and so with us, and so has Mindy. I see Mindy there.
like I said, this was my first time attending this event, and I got to host it. So I know I will be back. This is so fun. You guys were great, really cool.
You did a great job tonight, Corey. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Lee.
And everything.
Yep, good work.
Thank you.
And definitely the, those that I know Betsy and Mindy are from other story
Mhm.
swap groups. Think about the ones in the future or next month, stories of love.
Yeah.
You may have already done it. I've
Yeah.
got some people already
Yeah.
nominated, but
Yeah,
send it to me.
love
Definitely.
to. Love to. I just had a comment for Lee because I loved your old grandpa voice in your story. It was just priceless, and his little dog. But I have some very funny nephews, and John went away to the University of Arizona and majored in starting new clubs. And he actually got a hammock club going and got funding from the school to put up hammocks. But he also started a squirrel fishing club. And I
Wow.
have an official license to squirrel fish. And it requires a fishing pole with a line and an unshelled peanut. And John was actually on campus one afternoon squirrel fishing and got stopped by one of the campus police who told him he had to stop harassing the squirrels. And John, being John, whipped out his wallet and his license and he said, "But I have a squirrel fishing license." And the cop looked very confused, but left him alone to finish squirrel fishing. And that's a true story.
Also, one other thing that the Storytelling Association of California does is we have a thing called the Jenny Fund. And Mindy may have, I think she just participated in it. She could mention that. But in the Jenny Fund, we send storytellers to schools. It has been on Zoom. We're doing some in person now. Underserved schools. And we provide storytellers, and we pay the tellers $50 or $100, depending if they have to travel. And we do assemblies, we do anything. It could be even high school. We've done mostly elementary school. And we've done assemblies. We've done one assembly a month for 3 months. We connect with the teachers and see what they want. We've went into the classroom, and it's a special fund from an old member that had passed away named Jenny that I don't know, but some of you may. Mindy, can you tell us, because you were involved with it, right?
Sure, es cierto. In San Diego, things have been going back to some in-person in schools and outside of schools, storytelling and other performing events, but it's been slow. And so I went to a school with of whom I'm really familiar, and they're really familiar with me. And I had worked there on and off for a couple of years. It's a Title I school, and I was there for a couple grades or one grade, I can't remember exactly, but I was there a theater person, and we did all kinds of things. And some of you know that I'm a puppeteer as well. And well, it took a long time to get going, but we finally got going. At the end of one semester, the teacher said, "We're exhausted. We can't even think." And then so I started up again, and finally last December, we did it. And this was nice. It was a nice collaboration with Black Storytellers of San Diego, with Storytellers of San Diego. And we went out on 2 different days in teams of 2. And it was lovely. And the children loved it. We might have been the first in-person performances that they've had. And we had a show for grades 1, all the grades 1, and a show for grades 2. And I was here's just a PS on the story. Thank you, Jenny Fun. It was a lot of collaborating. There are a lot of cooks in all of our kitchens. It was a lot of fun. So I encourage any of you to take the spear of arts and education and go out and ask the Jenny Fund to help you
Right,
and get it going live again. So I want to say this PS on the neighborhood, because this is an adjacent neighborhood to mine, City Heights, where I do lots of community work. And they are a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. And since I've been absent from the school, they've gone down one whole class. Now they're down to 5 classes per grade instead of 6, because people are moving out because they can't afford this neighborhood, which is pretty much an immigrant and refugee neighborhood. So
yeah.
just a comment on SoCal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and right now we do not have any groups doing this. So we're looking for groups. So if you know of schools, teachers, it can be one teacher, it could be in a classroom, it could be assemblies, it could be anything. Joyce and I have just put a proposal together, and I've sent it to some people I know about doing, I think it's 5 different half-hour shows for kindergarten, first grade kids in the classroom or assembly if they want to. And I've sent that around to some people. And so if any of you have the ideas, you could send it to me and I can pass it on. But if you know Rupa Mohan, who's on our board, she's the one who's running it. But if you don't know how to get a hold of her, you could get a hold of me and I could pass it on. You can get all the information. And I see Nancy has her hand up here. She was on a bit ago. Are you there, still there, Nancy? Hey, Nancy.
Hi. I don't know that I had my hand up, but I think that my comment is not really fitting for what you're talking about right now. So I don't
No,
have
we're
to.
done. Whatever you're on.
Oh, okay. Hi, Ed. I remember you.
Yeah, I remember you from the
I
last.
remember. I remember your story, and I didn't put this all together, like, and you know, I didn't put everything together, who you are and SAC and all of that. And when I joined, I'm like, okay, fine, some guy named Ed Lewis. I didn't, put this whole thing together. But yes, I remember you.
That was up in